yellow.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, and I'll be your host. I think you're going to enjoy hearing from my guest today, but before we get into the interview, I'd like to remind everyone that our podcast is made possible with support from MD Coaches, a company dedicated to empowering physicians to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches online at mymdcoaches.com. Well, today I'll be talking with Dr. Courtney Chambers, who was born in Jamaica, but began his undergraduate education here in the U.S. at the age of 15. He graduated from the University of Hartford in Bloomfield, Connecticut, at the age of 19 with a B.S. in chemistry and biology, and he went on to earn his M.D. at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine, before completing a residency in surgery at the Hospital of St. Raphael, part of the Yale University affiliate program in New Haven. Later on, he did additional training in trauma, burns, and critical care at the University of California, San Francisco at Fresno. He's got a really compelling story of surgical practice in several different locations, literally coast to coast. And he joins us today from his home in Orlando. So now let's hear my conversation with Dr. Courtney Chambers. Well, I'm talking today with Dr. Courtney Chambers down in Orlando, Florida. Courtney, it's great to have you with us today, and thank you so much for joining us on Prescription for Success.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. You have a career that is unique in a number of ways, not the least of which is the number of geographic locations where you've practiced. And I'm looking forward to hearing a lot about that. But probably the thing that might be of most interest to our listeners, I suspect, is your beginnings. You're actually a native of Jamaica. Am I right about that? Is that where you're born?
Yes, that's correct.
And at what age? Well, tell me a little bit about growing up there. What was family life like for you and your early education?
Yeah, it was something to actually reflect on quite a bit. As a young boy, I was raised the son of two teachers. My father, the principal of an elementary school or primary school, we call it there. And my mother actually taught in that school.
That's a good start.
It's a very good start.
So you grew up with people that had a lot of respect for education.
Oh, boy, the utmost and ultimate respect for education and academics. The joke is that as soon as I could talk, I was in the classroom. And so education for me, formal education, if you will, started at a very young age.
That's terrific.
Yes. We grew up on a farm. I am one of six. And my mom actually left the island early in my childhood to come to the States and forward her education, going from teacher back in Jamaica to eventually getting her master's degree in education here.
Great.
Yeah. And the other joke is my dad would punt. As soon as we finished high school there, he would drop kick and she would catch. And so I am the last of six, but the five ahead of me all have engineering degrees. And
really?
Yes, and only one of those does not have a master's degree in something or another. Yes. So very, very interesting start. I went to high school.
You probably said it, but how old were you when your mom left?
I think I was, 3, maybe.
Really?
Yeah. And therein, began the commitment to and the sacrifices for, for better, as they say.
Did you get to see her very much?
Yes,
while you were growing up.
Yes, she was very good about, I think, just about every holiday. She would be back there, and when I got a little older, of course, with school holidays, my sister and I would get on a plane and we'd visit the States. So
and
yes.
So when she got her degree, was she teaching, I guess, up in Connecticut?
No, actually, she did not. She went into the insurance industry, which was at the time and still partly is a huge part of the economy that is Hartford, Connecticut. The Hartford Insurance, Aetna, where she worked. She worked at Cigna, also big there.
I see.
Yeah, and that was kind of her start that she used to encourage us to move ahead of the pack, if you will.
So Mom was in the States.
Yes.
The remainder of your siblings were in the States.
Correct.
And you left at what age?
So after high school, I graduated at 15 and came to the States for college at 15 years old.
Wow.
Yes. And it was challenging in some respects.
I bet.
But it was very comfortable in others because I was very comfortable with the academics and, math.
So you enrolled at University of Hartford at like age 15, 16, thereabouts?
I was 15, and there's a little story there. My mom recently told my wife of 23 years that she had to get special permission from the state of Connecticut to enroll a 15-year-old in college.
I would imagine, yeah.
And I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Pretty unusual. Well, now that gets us into a really interesting line of questioning,
Okay.
and that is, what is it like to be a college student and you can't even drive?
So there's actually another good story along those lines. So I had to take the bus. I had to take the bus from my home to school, and there was one stop that I had to make each time. And one day in the dead of winter, I missed my connection. And it was horrific.
That's a bad season to be missing the bus.
It was horrific, and I finally got to school numb all over. But eventually, a dear friend of ours who lived literally a half a block away, we ended up coordinating our schedules, and my sister and I actually rode to school with him. We carpooled most days.
Well, that answers another of my questions, and yes. I was curious if you had lived in a dorm and had to deal with that sort of life as a teenager, but you were living at home and commuting to school.
Correct.
Throughout your undergraduate education, or not?
I did. Believe it or not, I had that experience before that because as a 10-year-old in high school, right. I was in boarding school, so right. I got my away from home experience early.
I see.
And it was actually good to be home for college. I think
I bet
support at a very challenging time for me was tantamount. And the entire family, I think 3 generations at the time, were in and around Hartford, Connecticut. So it was very, 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 very good, supportive place and time for me.
But now, as a 15-year-old, tell me, how did you find the experience of the rather challenging academics of college? What was that like for you?
It was interesting. And not to brag, but it wasn't terribly challenging, the academics. I think what was challenging was time management and excelling, which I did in high school. High school was fairly easy for me. But coming to an entirely new system, an entirely new way of teaching and learning, and I think biting off a little more than I could chew my first semester. I delved into biology, chemistry, physics, calculus, and I think Spanish. And I tried out for the varsity soccer team.
Did you really?
So,
did you make it?
I did. I got cut my first year.
Really?
They had the nerve.
Yeah. Well, I thought maybe you might have had a little bit of an advantage because I bet soccer is what they play, on the sandlots.
Absolutely.
Here,
absolutely.
Other things.
Yes, I was an avid sport fan and athlete. I played table tennis, cricket, track, soccer, and anything else they threw at me back in high school. Which is why I thought I was more than good enough to make the team. But I think again, it showed my naivete and hopefully a little more confidence than I thought I knew that I could do all of that. And really I had to retool. I had to audit one or two classes, I think, and sort of bounce back for the following semester and the year. Yeah.
So when it came time to make a decision about medical school, when exactly did that happen? Did you have your eye on medicine from the beginning? It sounds like you had a lot of engineers in the family.
Very true. And my sister before me, also an engineer, electrical engineer, thought that was a reasonable path. I remember one night I heard her sobbing in her room, and I went to check on her, and she was struggling with one of her engineering classes. And my response was something that sounded like, well, I'm sorry that you're struggling like this, but I'm going to take the easier route. I'm going to go to medical school.
Did you really? Oh, my goodness.
So right around sophomore year, after I had recognized again and realized my love for the sciences, instead of going into an engineering or a research type track, I discussed with the administrative group over in the Science School of Sciences, and we decided that I would be allowed to apply to medical school.
And you were still, I would assume, at the time that you got your bachelor's degree, you were still younger than most of your peers.
Yes, sir. I was an old 19-year-old at the time, and looking out from college.
And that's when you started medical school at age 19?
I sure did. I did, yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about medical school. Was it any more? It sounds like undergraduate school was pretty much of a breeze for you. How was it in medical school?
So I think I handled undergrad. I eventually made the soccer team. I played 3 years of varsity soccer, and our last year we actually went Division I. But I left college, I think, a more of a rounded student athlete than I did, an excelling in the sciences student. And I think medical school was much more of a challenge for me. And I think I struggled. I struggled my first year. I was in a...
What was it more the character of the courses that you were taking, or was it more about volume and time management and that sort of thing? What was the big challenge?
I think it was the latter. I think I was again maybe too young, to be honest with you. And I think it was volume and time management both. I did at that point move out into an apartment, and I think there were a lot of new things and new processes. I was driving, I was away, I was alone, and it was still close to home, but I don't think I managed it very well at all, to be honest with you.
But you figured out a way to do it. obviously.
I figured out a way to do it. Yes, I sure did.
And at what point did you make a decision about what you were going to do for residency training?
Another good question, Randy. So while I was on the farm, I thought, this is easy. I'm going to be a veterinarian. I love sciences. I love the animals. I want to help them get better. And I did. And as time drew nigh, as they say, toward our clinical rotations, by then I had figured out that it's not just fixing animals. I had transitioned, I think, in my thinking to my, and it sounds corny, my fellow man. And you don't just fix your fellow man. How are you going to fix them? And initially, I actually thought internal medicine was the way to go. I loved, again, every single generation I had come in contact with. I had grandmother, I had siblings, I had nieces and nephews that covered, 4 generations. And I loved the idea of being in and around an environment daily that consisted of interacting with anyone and everyone. And so I really thought a broad scope of practice where I would talk to people a lot and listen to people a lot, and that sort of thing was where I was headed. But that fixing stuff trait, if you will, really stuck with me. And the closer I got to my clinical rotations, the more my eye drifted toward surgery. And believe it or not, orthopedics made a lot of sense to me. And so what I ended up doing, and I'm thinking a lot of folks ended up doing this as well, is I eliminated based on rotations. I wasn't one of those, out of the blocks, I want to be a surgeon type of students. I was undecided, I think, and I used the elimination process to figure out what I think I probably wouldn't be able to do well. Pediatrics, I couldn't talk to them and they couldn't talk to me.
Right.
So I had a tough time with communication and looking for, what I needed to succeed, I think, in whatever I did, that didn't seem to fit well with me.
So it was sort of a process of elimination,
yes,
it sounds like, which is a great way to approach it, I think.
Yes.
Yeah.
The more sort of medicine that I did, the more I recognized chronic illnesses probably wouldn't be my forte. And psychiatry, for example, I did right before I did general surgery. And that was rough. That was rough for me, being unable again to sort of make that quick, effective move to get this person better. And so by the time I did my surgery rotation, it was nirvana. I mean,
right.
The appendicitis patient was my ultimate. You had a child who was sick and missing school and missing soccer practice, and in an hour they were begging for a cheeseburger because the appendix was out, the nausea was gone, the pain was relieved, and they were ready to go. So yes,
there's something very satisfying about the immediate reinforcement that what you thought was correct turned out to be correct. And
yes,
great results.
Absolutely,
I understand. Being a surgeon myself,
I
understand.
I said that. I said that with you in mind.
Yeah. So, and again, to carry on with the same theme, so you made that decision.
Yes.
You got yourself into a surgery residency, and did it seem like a good fit from the beginning? Did you have moments when you thought, have I made a mistake? What was it like in those first years?
I'll tell you, I was absolutely and still am in love with the practice of general surgery. I don't remember, regardless of what the situation was, a moment where I wished I had done or had chosen something else. And, and I'm being perfectly honest. And
that's a good thing. I had exactly the same experience, and
yes.
It is really nice when you make a decision of that kind of magnitude and realize that you've done the right thing.
Yes. And I think it came about as a result of the process that I had gone through during the rotations, where there was nothing else that I could have done that would have felt as good as general surgery, as a rotation, as a third year. And so my fourth year, I did quite a few sub-internships, as you know, surgical ICU, trauma, ICU, GI. I did a lot of those sort of rotations. And so I was extremely comfortable as an intern in general surgery. We had a pyramid program at the time, and you remember those.
Indeed.
we had 8 of us that started, and only 3 of us finished as chief residents, and it kept it very interesting. And you had to be on top of your game to make the cut, literally, as they say. So it was a very good place for me. I don't know anything other than full steam ahead. So that worked very well for me.
Yeah. And in those programs with a fairly sharp pyramid, you really have no choice but to always be at your best.
Yes, sir. Yes,
clearly
sir.
That paid off for you.
Yes.
And then, and all of your residency training took place in the Yale New Haven system.
It did.
When you finished your chief residency year, did you go into practice at that point, or didn't you do some additional training, some fellowship training?
I stayed in New Haven for a few months, just being an overnight attending, covering the CT ICU, while I got my search finalized for a position. Yeah. And so it wasn't until a few months later that we packed up and headed south to Miami, Florida, for my first stint as a general surgeon. Yeah. Yeah.
And did you join a group in Miami, or?
I did. Yeah. I did. I joined it was a 6-man group, and we made it. I made it the Dynamic 7, I think we called it. And it was interesting. We had 2 docs of Cuban descent, 2 from Argentina, 2 from I forget the other country, and then I was the other guy. Yeah. But I spoke and still do speak quite a bit of very good especially medical Spanish.
So and in Miami, it's a very multi-ethnic culture.
It's very much so. Very much so. Yeah. Very strong Latino, Spanish population, and it was actually a good fit as well.
And this practice was based primarily at a community hospital.
So there's where the fun really began.
Doesn't it always?
Yeah. The group covered, I want to say, 7 hospitals, because they came together. Each had their own sort of little solo practice going, and they coalesced into this group. So they all kept their privileges. And I think by the end of the count, they were up to 7 hospitals. So when I was on call, at least, I got to cover 4 of the 7 every other night. I can't
imagine.
Every other night, every other weekend.
And did they all have active emergency rooms? And
oh, yes, they did.
Potential for trauma? And yeah.
No, thankfully we did not cover trauma. The trauma was thankfully.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
You were in an era when trauma was much more likely to be sent to a trauma center.
Exactly. And thank God for Jackson Memorial Hospital, because they got all the regional trauma. We did not get to cover trauma at these community hospitals.
But there are the perforated viscera and the ruptured aneurysms and that sort of thing. Yeah.
And at the time, I did vascular as well, so I even got a few ruptured aneurysms in my early couple of years.
Those are fairly frequent in Florida, aren't they?
I saw more than I did at our place in a short span of time.
Same experience with me. I practiced in the Tampa Bay area for a little over a decade, and it was astounding. My only partner went on vacation for 3 weeks once, and I did a ruptured aneurysm every other day for 10 days.
Wow!
So it is interesting how the demographic affects the sort of pathology that you see. But anyway, I'm talking about me, and we want to talk about you.
No, that's good to know.
Go ahead and tell me about this practice in Miami.
So it was difficult covering all those hospitals every other night, every other weekend. Newlywed. We married, packed the car, and drove there. So it was very challenging. We barely saw each other, and we still joke. We joke about how we ever conceived our son in that year is still mind-boggling. But it was tough. We had I'll never forget my little red Volvo, and I put so many miles on it. It was falling apart by the time we got rid of it. The hours were tough. The cases were difficult. The patients were challenging, and all the different hospitals and systems, tough to manage, tough to broker through that. And so the first year, I learned a lot. I learned a whole lot. We had some very good surgeons in the group. And I still consider that another sort of growing year coming out of training.
Yeah, I think most surgeons have that experience. And you can learn a lot in 5 years, but you really do keep on learning as long as you practice.
Yes.
And I felt, and I'm going to be interested to know if you felt the same way, is that private practice is so much different and so much more educational, because there are some circumstances where you have no alternative but to make a decision and move on it.
Yes. Yes.
And that's the big difference between being in private practice and being a resident.
Yes. And it's there's no chief resident, there's no fellow, there's no attending to sort of lighten the weight. I remember toward the end of my tenure with the group, they contracted with yet another surgeon. This doc was colorectal fellowship trained, I think at the Mayo. He came with very good accolades. And one day he called me aside and he said, "Hey, Courtney," he goes, "I've got to ask you something." He goes, "I've been watching you for about a week." And he said, "You are the medical student, the intern, the resident, the chief resident, the fellow, the social worker." Yeah. And he marveled at how many hats I would switch off in any given case or any given day. And I think that's sort of what you're saying is you have all this support system in training, and once you leave, you've got to function in all those capacities,
right?
And you've got to do it well.
So much more responsibility
Yes.
that you never had to think about before.
Correct. That was an eye opener for sure.
Well, you've had sort of an itinerant career. I know you didn't stay in Miami forever. What was next for you?
Well, so here's the transition. So as we just highlighted, there was barely enough time for sleep. But after a year, I thought I could do better on my own. So I launched out into solo practice.
In Miami.
In Miami. And you want to talk about a tough market. And as luck would have it, I had to add another hospital ER panel. So I was up to 8.
And so now you are not only a relatively newly trained surgeon, but you are also a business owner.
That's correct. I formed my first PA, learned about that, and shared office with an orthopedic surgeon, a neurosurgeon, and then it was myself. We shared office space, and that's how I cut down on my overhead as I did this. But what I also learned was, now the real solo practice experience hit me in the face, because I was always on the hook now.
Right.
There was no partner covering. There was no, leave for a weekend and turn off the pager at the time. I was on the hook 24/7, 365, and that was extremely challenging as I tried to build a practice. You remember the being affable and available and amicable. Well, I had to be all those A's and then some. and it was challenging. I think I worked less, to be honest, than I did in the group, but I was on the hook a heck of a lot more. Tough downtime.
Exactly.
In that phase. The beauty of that, though, is eventually, after 4 years, I had weaned it down to 2 hospitals, and I was only covering 2 ER panels after 3.5 years of doing this 7-8 hospital route.
That's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it was.
Most of the people that I know in that situation are very afraid, and particularly in Florida. I have some experience in Florida, but yes. You are somewhat reluctant to give up any of your territory.
Yes, extremely so. So. Yes, and when your practice is basically, I think back then that was the definition of the acute care surgeon. That's basically what we did. We covered, as you mentioned before, the appendices and the ruptured whatevers and the perforated these, and that's how we built a practice back then. You started in the emergency rooms, and you sort of proved yourself with these difficult cases, and those attendings and those primary care doctors then would refer the elective cases at a later date. So. That was something.
I'm Rhonda Crow, founder and CEO for MD Coaches. Our mission at MD Coaches is to educate, encourage, and empower physicians to be strong healthcare leaders. Our team of certified physician coaches brings real-world experience from their years of medical practice to our coaching clients. Working with physicians at all stages of their professional career, we know what a challenge today's healthcare landscape can present, especially to a new physician just getting started. We work with our clients to find answers and develop strategies that positions them for success. If you're ready to start mapping your own path to professional success, simply go to our website at mymdcoaches.com and send us an email to set up a complimentary session. Remember, at MD Coaches, we see you, we believe in you, and we are here for you.
Well, that's a good start. So what next? You didn't stay in Miami always. What then?
Well, so that was not all roses and daisies. What I found at the end of those 5 years, Randy, was a very difficult position to be in, because I had not qualified for the American Board of Surgery certifying exam. I had tried to qualify, but in those years of barely sleeping and running around to 8 hospitals, I was never prepared for the qualifying exam.
I understand.
And so I was staring down the possibility of losing my board eligibility or doing something very drastic to maintain board eligibility and become board certified. My chairman, God bless him, Dr. Reinhold, spoke to me very sternly and said, look, you could probably make a living as a non-certified general surgeon. He said, but life becomes a heck of a lot easier if you bite the bullet now and become board certified almost at all costs.
Right.
And so the decision became a lot easier. Executing it was very difficult. We had just literally finished building a home in a very nice area of South Florida. And the claim to fame was it was the same area that our Miami Dolphins quarterback, Marino, had built his home. It wasn't at the same
nice
level, but it was in the neighborhood. And we had to literally close on the build, put it on the market, and I never got to sleep a single night in that house.
Wow.
After all that blood, sweat, and tears. And thankfully, may he rest in peace, Steve Parks at UCSF in Fresno had accepted me to do, I call it a hybrid year, where I would come into the program and register in the ACGME accredited general surgery program to maintain that board eligibility, and do a year there before then being able to sit for the qualifying exams a year later. And so we packed up, my wife, myself, and our little guy running around, and we headed west to Fresno, California, to another very different existence, if you will.
So now you got a change in practice status, a profound change in income.
Yeah. Oh boy.
And a whole different set of rules to live by. And I'm really looking forward to hearing this story. Carry on.
It was very, very challenging. Two things worked very well for me, and we haven't touched on them as yet. I talk about my friends. I talk about my family, and I don't talk much about my faith. But boy, I needed all three F's, and I needed them badly.
I bet.
Because this was really trying. And so, yes, we went to Fresno. My wife, who had given up her career, she was, when I met her, heading towards studying forensic pathology. And she decided she would stay home and be a stay-home mom with our son. We went to this little apartment in Fresno, California, and took on the role of basically an upper-level resident there, and it was tough. She actually ended up going back to work because it was the salary did not do what we needed it to do, and we had to make some serious transitions, and
she went to work as a pathologist.
No, she had not finished studying, so she ended up she actually ended up managing, which she had done for me at times, managing in the children's hospital there in Fresno. A number of practices. So she worked it was a billing company who sort of were on site at the hospital, and she took on that role that I think no one really wants of physician education in the billing and collecting arena.
I see.
Yeah. She ended up sort of managing the practices as well. So we were both working. The little guy was growing up. And boy, I still call it one of the best years of my professional career. And here's why. The experiences that I then had were just incredible. I remember some of these cases to this day. I had never seen so much necrotizing fasciitis in my entire life or read about it. Trauma there was incredible. The one that comes to mind was the shotgun blast to the chest at close range. There was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of burn. They had a burn unit, level 1 trauma and burn unit, hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I'd only heard about and read about. And they were diving people on ventilators there at the time. You name it, it was there. They had a strong vascular surgery department and group that worked alongside. And one of the more important parts of the puzzle was I got to go over to the VA hospital and work with the veterans there. And boy, oh boy, what an experience that was.
I bet.
So I did things I never did in training. I had never done in practice. I saw things I hadn't seen before. I got very efficient at managing a lot of surgical diseases that I hadn't before.
I bet you did.
Hand surgery, the hand panel, I ended up being number one, not call, but in-house person for the hand panel prior to the hand plastics attending coming in. And I hadn't seen so much hand work. We did stuff that I tell you, I had to go read about over and over again before we actually saw the patient. It was just incredible experience.
Yeah, it's really an incredible education. I think you learn more, and I wonder if you agree. I think you learn more when you're dealing with trauma than in any other area of surgery, because it's not only the anatomy and the surgical technique and those sorts of things, but the pathophysiology of shock and that world. And of course, you were out there. I'm a little embarrassed that I can't call his name right now, but the head of that San Francisco program was literally the person who wrote the book on trauma and set up the basis for hyperbaric oxygen and management of necrotizing fasciitis, as well as some other things. So you were in a great place, and really, particularly if the goal was to prepare yourself better for board certification, I don't think you could have landed in a better spot.
You're absolutely right, Randy, and for a number of reasons. We had Dr. Parks, who made it clear that he knew my type. What was my type? Well, he said, I know your type. He said, you're the guy who was supposed to go home at 6, but there's a triple lumen at 6:30. And rather than get in the car and go, you're telling everybody you got it covered and you go do it. And that's exactly what I did. I did it in training. I did it in practice, and I started doing it there. But before I got too far into it, he cut me off and he assigned me one of the junior attendings. I don't know if I could call names. Am I allowed to say names?
Absolutely.
Dr. Stickler, that's her name. And we sat down allotted times, and I read, you're going to love this, I read Seymour Schwartz's yellow textbook cover to cover by the time I was done.
Good way to get it done.
And I'd never done it before. I had excerpts and chapters here and there, but that set aside time to go through chapters and questions and discussions as I sit there, sometimes half asleep, if not more so. It was just an incredible, incredible experience. And those folks were just dedicated to having me succeed at the boards. And
that's a great idea.
And that's what happened.
Sounds like you had some great guidance.
You bet.
Lucky
you bet.
So then what?
So the one fateful long weekend, we decided to head up to the Napa Valley to exhale a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up falling in love with the Napa Valley. And then one of the things that really was interesting was my wife's perspective. And she said, I could live here. And I went, okay. I'll say that when we go on vacations, right? I could live here. And that was fine. And it was a dream at the time. And then as the end of the year drew nigh, we started having a few options. And you'll ask me about this one later, or I'll tell you. Very soon in my stint in Fresno, the folks there figured out that I was safe, or I am safe. And you and I know, when you're a senior attending or a supervisory role in sort of, you want your junior folks to be, if nothing, you want them to be safe. Mm-hmm. And then they recognized that I enjoyed sort of incorporating the youth, as we call them, into decision making and into the execution of whatever it was. And pretty soon they started treating me more as not just me, what I was going in, but more of a peer, if you will. Mm-hmm. And it was extremely gratifying to have them recognize me for, I'm going to say, my abilities, my capabilities, my desires at the time, to do it right, to do it well, and to impart unto the youngsters.
Yeah, it really says something about your ability and your character, I might add.
It was good, and thank you, and I appreciated it. And so one of them called me aside one day and said, "Hey, would you ever consider staying on when you're done with this year? Because we've been talking about you." And I could have cried. And we think you'd be a great addition. And I ended up staying on, but not sort of full time, and certainly not forever. I stayed on while I prepared for the boards, and so I then signed on as a junior attending, covering the VA mostly, and some general surgery trauma at we call it the big house at the time. Mm-hmm. Preparing conferences, preparing lectures, preparing grand rounds, preparing the residents, taking them through cases. I even got to do some endoscopy, which I hadn't done in practice again. And so by the time the exams rolled around, Randy, I was, as they say, I was locked and loaded, and I was raring to go. I was going to teach. I was going to teach this exam a lesson. But I think that was very pivotal for me. It gave me a boost internally that I don't think anyone else or anything else could have at the time. It was. I struggle for the words because I still get emotional over the fact that they recognized what I stood for and what I continue to stand for. Yes, very much so. Very much so.
So what was the next move?
Yeah, so I stayed there. And the longer we stayed, the more we visited the Napa Valley. And so the choices became very clear. Stay on in Central California, head back to South Florida, or other, right? Other would be do something where you can maybe even live in the Napa Valley, because by then we had fallen head over heels with it. And at the time, I remember looking up the malpractice premiums for general surgery in Miami. and they were north of $80,000 a year. And certainly it did not seem attractive to go back to hustling just to pay malpractice.
Just to pay your insurance.
At the time. And a lot of folks had gone bare and were going bare. And that didn't strike me as sensible either. And so we kind of struck Miami off the list. You know, it was a difficult place. We didn't particularly want to be there to raise our son. And it was close to family and close to a lot of folks. There were some good friends there, but we very almost painfully struck Miami off the list. And so, Central California versus Northern California. And lo and behold, a position opened up in Fairfield, California. And Fairfield is where the Travis Air Force Base is located. And a community hospital had a multi-specialty group who were looking for a general surgeon. And I could live in Napa and commute about a half an hour that was required for call. And it was almost a no-brainer for us because it was a very nice position, good work, good place, and we could live in Napa. And so we headed up the coast, if you will, and settled there in Napa, working in Fairfield as a general surgeon for a multi-specialty group.
So I'm guessing the character of the practice and the type of pathology that you had to deal with was, shall we say, strikingly different from Miami? It was different, but the same. You know, there were still a lot of gallbladders. There were a lot of hernias. There was quite a bit of cancer, actually. And so, in that sense, quite similar. Different than Fresno for sure. That I did not have to do trauma. There was a trauma team, and it was, I think, level 3, if anything, at the time. So I was not involved with that part of things. And how many years there? So was that your last stop before? It wasn't to where you are now.
It wasn't.
There's more.
Yeah. There's so much.
But wait, there's more.
But wait, there's more. That group actually, I'm going to use the word folded for lack of a better term. And as they were folding, the hospital said, you know, we have a multi-specialty group. We love what you do and how you do it. Why don't you work with us? And so I transitioned after a year. And ended up staying a total of about 5 years or so in working in Fairfield. And we had quite a few family issues back east and were invited back to be closer to family. So we hightailed it back to Connecticut for those reasons. And it worked. Stayed there for another 6 years. And then that small hospital was being, we're going to say, merged with a larger hospital. And things were looking even more challenging professionally. And as luck would have it, my old position in Fairfield opened back up. And so 6 years later, we're back in Napa working at my same old job in Fairfield.
That's interesting.
It's very interesting. Very interesting.
Speaks, I think, to the relative shortage of qualified physicians. It's something that I don't think most Americans are aware of. But this country is not just loaded with physicians and surgeons.
Right.
And the fact that you are able to leave a community for a fairly lengthy period and then be recruited right back there is a fairly striking example of just what the situation is. I don't think I won't go. I was about to say I don't think I've ever visited a community that thought they had all the physicians that they needed. Certainly, there are some that are oversupplied.
Yes,
but for the most part, people are looking.
Yes, and I'm gonna pat myself on the back here only because I try to sort of teach my son and anyone else who would listen the idea of not burning bridges. Because you just never know what opportunity is going to appear where and with whom, and who's going to be involved in decision making that might greatly affect your life and your profession and your world. And I think, every place that I've gone, every position that I've been in, I've given nothing short of 120%, if not more. I've done everything I've been able to do to leave a position or a group or better than when I got there. And I think we need to do that more. Every relationship, every friend, every neighbor, everyone you come in contact with on a daily basis. I personally think that it is our challenge to try to make whatever spot you started from better when you left, and that's what I think happened. The folks recognized again. I did get a couple of awards, community service awards in breast cancer the first time I was there. I remember them asking me the first time, "Hey, we're trying to develop this breast care program. Would you be our point man in surgery?" And I went off and joined the American Society of Breast Surgeons. I went to as many of those conferences, et cetera, as I could. And I really became an integral part of the, as you know, the multi-specialty group that is needed to take care of these folks properly. And that's the kind of thing I think that when they needed someone to rebuild the elective general surgery sort of practice, that they reached back out to me, and I was able to accept.
Well, there is a lot of wisdom there. There's no question that first impressions are very, very important, but lingering memories are probably quite a bit more important.
Yes, sir.
You are definitely living proof of that. So after a few additional years in California, now you find yourself back in Florida. How did that come about?
I myself had back surgery in August of 2018. And after a prolonged sick leave, if you will, we were starting to feel that so-called empty nesters syndrome.
Right. But now you were in Orlando at this point when you had your surgery? Or still
no, I was still in California.
Okay.
The going through, leading up to surgery, the decision for surgery, going through surgery, and then recovery was, again, difficult in that it was just my wife and I out there with friends, of course, but all family were back on the East Coast. And I think we felt the distance every earthquake, we felt the distance.
I bet you did.
and I'm going to say every crisis, and this was a big one. We felt it, Skype and phones and all that, computers and those help, but we again felt the distance, and we decided that if nothing else, we wanted to be closer to our son. And in reality, it helped us on a number of levels. It's cheaper to live here in Orlando. We're in an apartment. The three of us are very close physically together again, with our almost 2-year-old puppy. And And it's actually been very good. It's been very good being here, recovering, rehabbing, if you will, and sort of retooling for what's going to become, or what has become, another phase in my professional career.
Exactly, and I was just coming to that. What is your medical career doing at this point?
And an interesting question. And right now, I am actually in sort of healthcare. I'm doing a utilization review for a utilization review and data management, data analytics company out of Philadelphia. I'm doing it remotely, which is a whole new realm of existence for me.
It is.
And there's no hands-on, and there's no face-to-face, and there's no nonverbal cues. Meetings are Skype with, anywhere from 3 to 23 people. And it's very, very interesting. No healthcare decisions per se. I'm not practicing medicine.
Clinical decisions.
No clinical decisions. Correct.
Yeah.
I'm simply in the field.
And so, if they're not clinical decisions, what kind of decisions are you making?
Oh, so these are hospital stays. It's the Medicare population. Who should be inpatient? Who should be outpatient or observation? Discharge planning, and some education of those with boots on the ground, discussing cases with a lot of sort of hospitalists. As you know, they're the docs on the ground in the hospital, daily touches with the patients. A lot of emergency room physicians, and that dialogue is between those groups. Yeah. So
now, does that mean that you're that guy? That guy that we in the clinical world we have this mental picture of somebody sitting in a room somewhere sipping cappuccino and making a decision about who gets admitted and who has to go home. Are you that guy?
Close.
Yeah.
I don't drink much coffee as I watch my blood pressure, but I am sitting in the room, and you know what's good? There's a bunch of algorithms that are pretty nicely laid out. Medicare actually is the one who makes the decisions. I think I would be the enabler, right? I enable the physician to make the right decision. And in the end, what happens is the correct decision will save any given patient a tremendous amount of expense because they'd get the bill. But it also saves the hospitals and the system a tremendous amount of expense because they may be unable to recoup billing on any given patient if they don't get it right. There's a lot to be said about documentation, which I'm learning, and I think at some point we'll eventually, hopefully, get to teach some of my colleagues or our colleagues, if you will. But yeah, there's a lot to be done in that arena.
Well, I'm really glad that we got to make it to this part of the conversation because I am aware that you understand, and I'll bet that your opinion of the decision makers that seem to have so much control over the decisions that you make at the bedside, and it can be very frustrating for people in clinical practice.
Yes.
And I think there is tendency. In fact, I think there is an inescapable certainty that when you're the clinician at the bedside and you have the feeling that your better judgment is being overruled by somebody who as you say, is sitting in air-conditioned comfort and drinking coffee and has not been up all night and the sorts of things that people at the bedside deal with, there is a tendency when you're in that bedside position to think that the guy on the other end of the line really has no conception of what you're actually doing. And you're living proof that at least one of those guys knows exactly what it's like.
Yes, right? and it's good that I bring, my 23 years, as I say, in the trenches to the table, and I'm ready to educate anyone who challenges, my capacity to encourage them to do something on their end. I think the company was wise and is wise to employ folks like myself for just that reason. I've been there, I've done that, and it's good to be able to have that sort of behind me when I make every call or every text or every computer communication.
And do you know? Do you have any kind of relationship with other physicians who are essentially your colleagues in this kind of work? And do you find that they are mostly people a lot like you, and they're not the monsters that we envision?
Absolutely. I've met two people almost at the opposite ends of, I'm going to say, the age spectrum, in that one doc who I are onboarding together, he'd been, I think, 30-something years in practice, and he was an intensivist, or is an intensivist by trade. And then there's one other physician who we've had cases together, who is a few years out of training, and she's working from home, but with two young ones at home, and so here we are, one almost retired, semi-retired, and one almost taking a break from her early years in practice to do something like this. And it's interesting because I'm not sure how many surgeons they have in this role. Maybe one other that I know of, but most peers are usually internists or general medicine type folks who are peers and colleagues. The folks who run the company are also docs and board certified and family practice fellows and all these accolades as well.
I would guess that surgeons are relatively rare in this kind of work for precisely the reasons that we talked about earlier in the interview, and that is that surgeons are particularly are as a rule, they're people who thrive on immediate reinforcement, and this sort of algorithmic decision making is just kind of not something that appeals to them. But it is certainly good for the system when all specialties are represented in the type of work that you're doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's I think coming off of about a year and a little bit of recovering and I'm going to say rehabbing and recovering from surgery myself. It's a much better, I think, kinder way to gently get back to some place active in medicine. And I'm going to say this in reality, but also tongue in cheek, if that's where I head next, because we're sort of at a fork in the road at this juncture.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question. Do you feel like this will be what you do until such time as you want to completely retire, or do you have any interest in getting back into clinical medicine? Having had some experience as a surgeon myself,
Yes.
I didn't in any way foresee there would come a time when I was not physically well suited for that kind of work. And I had to discover that there were some other ways to be clinically active. You and I, again, share an experience in chronic wound care.
Yes.
But anyway, I'm blathering again. I'm interested. Do you think you would ever want to get back into clinical medicine in any way?
Yes. So I won't say struggled, but I've thought about what I could do. I'm not sure I would hurry back to a full-on general surgery practice.
Mm-hmm.
As it was, I was thinking about hyperbarics and wound care as sort of the next sort of step anyway.
Good choice.
And I enjoyed it as part of my general surgery practice on and off over the years. But what I like about it, and I'm sure you might share exactly my thought, is it's clinical medicine. There is some surgery, and the folks need good, dedicated doctors because they are probably the sicker group of people walking around the face of the earth.
No doubt about that. That's why they won't heal. That's why I won't say they won't heal, but they have such a hard time healing is because of the multiple comorbidities, as you know.
Yes. And I think that is what attracted me to that. I'm going to call it specialty because it started out as, my first introduction was a couple of nurses got a couple of rooms, in the building across the street. And that was the wound care center. And you struggled with the wound. And, I've been in the wound care clinic with the two singleplex chambers delivering hyperbaric oxygen with 3 nurses and a quick phone call to the various specialties. And I've actually formulated in my mind a multi-specialty wound care sort of clinic or practice where everyone is on board. And as you know, it's weight management, it's diabetes, it's hypertension, it's the vascular path, it's the dialysis patient. And everybody recognizes that it's a village. it's the village.
Exactly.
And I would love to be part of that kind of a practice, at some point in the future. It may never happen, but I think that may be where I might be best suited. I've thought about that for quite a while.
Well, it's truly a specialty in its infancy, and I don't know if you had a similar experience to mine, but I was in my 50s and still actively practicing in general surgery when I was asked by a hospital administrator to devote some of my time to the newly opened wound center. And I thought, well, this will be easy. I've been practicing surgery for over 30 years. And how can there possibly be anything that I don't know about wounds, right?
Right.
And of course, I discovered that there's quite a bit about the wound itself. And then, as you say, it's not about the sore, it's about the multiple comorbidities.
Yes, sir.
And the way you operate a successful wound care center, and I'll be interested to see if you agree, it's to create a network of other specialties that will get on board with you, not necessarily being present in the clinic.
Correct.
But to be readily available to help get the comorbidities under control. And we're just at the beginning of that, or that's as I see it. And I believe that given enough time, we will see that evolve to the point where it really is very effective. And it sounds like you've got exactly the right idea, if I'm reading you right.
You're absolutely right, Randy. You're absolutely right. I think the best outcomes in that population is caring for the patient as a whole. It has to be. And I think the point to be made there is it has to be a dedicated core of specialties and specialists that are involved. They're needy in the sense that they need an army, if you will,
right,
to take care of them. And you're right. The wound is usually but a symptom of a larger problem. And there is no healing wound without good nutrition. I'm preaching to the choir here. And there's no healing wound without smoking cessation. There's no healing wound with uncontrolled blood sugars and A1Cs. So yes, I agree with you 100%.
Well, it struck me in those years that I spent in chronic wound care that these people, these patients that are in need of a wound care center are much like the people that we read about in ancient times in the Bible with the draining sores, and they were outcasts. Nobody wanted anything to do
with them. Yes, sir.
And the advantage of the wound care center is we've got a place for them to go to actually manage the sore.
Yes.
But yet you have to have the assistance and the attention and the attentiveness of the many specialties that are required to get the comorbidities under control.
Yes.
And I think that, I don't know if you and I will live to see it done properly, but I think that's exactly where it's headed.
Yes, sir. It's going to take that thought, that concept, to be agreed upon by those in a position to make those things happen. And make.
Well, that's pretty easy, don't you think? It's easy to get doctors to agree on things, or maybe not.
If I were close by, I'd pinch you.
Wow.
Yeah. And is it the doctors or is it that other facet of the system? Right. I wonder about that sometimes.
Yeah. Well, clearly we have wandered into territory where we're not going to find the answer. But what I would like to do at this point, Courtney, is get into my favorite part of the program, and that is when we get to hear about our guests' own prescriptions for success. So I'm going to sit quietly for a moment. I'm going to turn the program over to you, and we will listen attentively while Dr. Courtney Chambers offers his prescriptions for success.
Thanks, Randy. So I have 3, and I think they're self-explanatory. I think they're connected, and I think they're very poignant. My first one sounds something like this. If you have not done so already, try to define what your success, and I put your in capitals, what your success would look and feel like to you. To you is also in capitals. Not what it would look and feel like to your parents, to your friends, and or family, and certainly not what it would look like to strangers. Then chart a path that will get you there. That's my first one. The second one is, in doing so, referring to number 1, ask for help. Ask for help early and ask for help frequently. This is not a sign of weakness. It is actually a sign of strength, in my opinion, and shows insight into yourself, into oneself. I won't forget my years as a junior resident. One of the things that the attendings loved when I was on call is that I would quickly assess a situation, a patient, and determine whether I could handle it and or whether I needed help. And calling for help was actually lauded because the likelihood of one making a mistake or an incorrect decision was diminished. The third one is be ever prepared. Along this journey to your success, be prepared so that when chances present themselves, you take them and you go boldly forward. One of the sayings I remember most vividly from my father was the following. He would say, there are 3 things which come not back: the sped arrow, the spoken word, and the neglected opportunity. And I looked this up later and found it was from an Arabic proverb. And again, I think this speaks for itself. Archer who sends an arrow toward target cannot take it back. You say something, it's been said. You can't unsay it. You can apologize till the cows come home. It's been said. And hopefully they weren't hurtful words. Hopefully they were constructive, kind, gentle words. And we've all been guilty of others. The neglected opportunity. Example, case in point. When I was approached to do this interview, it took me all of 2 seconds to decide that I would. And the reason is, I think I have something to say. I think I have a story to tell. I gave an example to a friend one day, and I said, I could only take out so many gallbladders. I could only fix or repair so many hernias. I could only excise or remove so many cancers. Those are finite numbers. They're fixed days of the week, fixed hours in the day. And as Doc and I know, we're fixed days that we get to operate. Sometimes they give us a little more out of our block time. But if I can touch lives outside of the operating room, outside of the office, outside of the practice, I can speak to more people than I can operate on. I can influence more thought than I can operate on. I can have 1, 2, 3 people touch 1, 2, 3 others, and so on, helping folk understand, helping folks be better for each other, be better for themselves, their families, their friends, and for our society. I think I can impact a whole heck of a lot more people than I can operate on. And so as I look to the future, I would relish the opportunity to be able to impact 1, 2, 3 people and start that chain reaction of them impacting others so we can all be a better version of ourselves and that our society can be a better version of itself. Those are my prescriptions. Those are my thoughts. And I think I'll stop there.
Well, Dr. Courtney Chambers, thank you so much for sharing that wisdom with us. It clearly has a profound basis in a well-spent career that is ongoing, and we are so grateful that you were able to join us today. Before we go, I want to give you an opportunity to let people know where they can find you and how they can get in touch. People are going to be inspired by your story, and they may want to hear more from you. So if you have An email address you like to share? If you're in the process of writing a book, you can advertise that, websites, blogs, whatever. How can we find you?
Well, an old surgeon once told me that very early in the day, he gave out his cell phone number and and expected to be woken up at all hours of the night with questions and calls and complaints and things, and he never got one. Everyone was appropriate. So I'm going to give out 2 emails that I use daily, and hopefully they'll be appropriate. I don't have a fancy website or anything as yet, maybe in the future. So my first email is C, my first initial, last name Chambers, MD @usa.net. So C Chambers, MD @usa.net. And my second is C Surgeon, MD @yahoo.com. So csurgeon@yahoo.com.
All right. We know how to track you down. And I bet a lot of people will want to do that. Courtney, it's been great talking with you. You really have an interesting story that I have enjoyed hearing. So thank you so much for taking the time, and do have a good day.
Thank you, Randy. Likewise.
And with that, it's time to bring this episode of Prescription for Success to a close. If you enjoy our program, we'd really love to make you part of it. Just visit our website at rxforsuccesspodcast.com and click on the Contact Us button at the top of the home page. Then all you have to do is scroll to the bottom, click on the big red Record button, announce yourself, and then read us your own personal prescription for success. And then we'll play your voice on the air. Don't forget, it's not just for doctors. Anyone involved in healthcare is welcome to participate. We appreciate your support very much. Thanks again so much for listening, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.